In 2007, my boyfriend and I started volunteering at a county animal shelter in California. That's where we met Duke, aka Danger Dog, who had arrived at the shelter as a puppy. He was an 11-month-old boxer hound mix, literally bouncing off his concrete kennel walls. He had already been adopted and returned to the shelter 5 times. My boyfriend took one look at him and said, "That dog could do agility." He started working with him, taught him to sit, lay down, shake, got him walking slightly better on a leash, playing with other dogs, and of course he taught him fetch. Suddenly, he was the dog at the shelter that everyone wanted to adopt. My boyfriend would always explain Duke was extra high energy and would need lots of training and people-driven activity. The potential adopter's answer was always, "Sure, as soon as I get off work or on the weekends. But during the day, we'll keep him in a crate or in the backyard or alone in the house." We knew another failed adoption would be the end for Danger Dog, so we offered to foster him. The shelter couldn't do a house check quite fast enough, so we ended up adopting him before somebody not quite ready for a potential Danger Dog tornado did. Now, 10 years later, Danger Dog has had cruciate surgery on both back legs. While he was recovering from his second surgery, he lost his sight. He was diagnosed with sudden acquired retinal degeneration syndrome. There is no treatment for it. But Danger Dog took it in stride. He had really become quite adept at not seeing, going with us on daily off-leash walks on our 11 acres. Then he had a spinal stroke. We thought we lost him. But it turned out it was not as bad as it initially seemed. There was no neurological damage, so he's still the same old happy-go-lucky and very, very talkative Danger Dog. But the blood clot from the stroke had bruised his spine, leaving him unable to use his left front and back leg. The damage was not permanent, but he would have to learn to use them all over again. Thanks to his physical therapy, where he's learning to walk again in an underwater treadmill, he's been slowly improving. At home, however, he still gets carried around. We think he might secretly be enjoying the special treatment. Danger Dog! Danger Dog! Danger Dog! Shortly after we became approved fosters, 18-month-old Beagle Shepherd mix Gunner arrived at the shelter. Gunner's owner had died, and there were no relatives able to take care of him. Like nearly every other dog at the shelter, Gunner had quickly developed kennel cough. But unlike every other dog at the shelter, he was not eating or even strong enough to get up and go outside. My boyfriend found Gunner languishing in his kennel and announced Gunner was too sick to survive another night at the shelter, so we'd be taking him home. Danger Dog was overjoyed at the prospect of having a playmate and tried desperately to get Gunner to play with him, but Gunner was too weak to even leave his crate. It would be almost a month before Gunner had enough strength to try to play with Danger Dog. By the time Gunner was healthy enough to go back to the shelter, he and Danger Dog had become inseparable, so Gunner never went back. Now, 10 years later, and like Danger Dog, 2 cruciate surgeries later, Gunner divides his time between trying to find the most comfortable spot in the house to take a nap and being Tigger's favorite playmate. Of course, after they're worn out, he is the perfect Tigger pillow. A female brindle and white, indecipherable mix of breeds, just over a year old, showed up stray at the shelter. After her 3-day stray hold, she became available for adoption and was named Claire. It soon became apparent that, like so many dogs in shelters, Claire was guarding her food bowl. In a 2012 survey of shelters, food bowl guarding was reported as one of the most common reasons for euthanasia, and only 34% of shelters attempted to modify this guarding behavior. Fortunately, us volunteers had recently convinced the shelter staff to use the ASPCA's SAFER assessment. The SAFER assessment is remarkable because it includes a training protocol to mitigate or eliminate the behavior problems it identifies. This meant that simple food bowl guarding was no longer an automatic death sentence. Claire was the first dog to be allowed to go to foster and go through the training program. Of course, we were the fosters who were going to prove it could be done, and we did. Claire passed her assessment and was soon adopted. Then, months later, Claire was returned to the shelter because she didn't get along with her adopter's cat. We offered to foster her again. Danger Dog was thrilled to have a new playmate, and so was Gunner. With this much fun, Claire just never made it back to the shelters. 9 years ago, at the shelter, Claire was labeled a pit bull mix, but we have no doubt she's a Labrador mix of some sort. She loves the water, has a waxy coat and webbed feet. She loves to roll. She's confident that she can catch hawks and geese if she barks at them loud enough when they fly by. She loves the mud. She really, really loves the mud. Of course, if there's any way to combine water, mud, and rolling, that, for Claire, is the perfect day. And of course, those rare times when she's not out rolling around in the mud, she's got that goofy lab personality on display. Samantha. A nonprofit humane society built a state-of-the-art $3 million shelter next door to the never-updated 1975 county shelter. The Humane Society only took dogs they selected from other shelters and dogs surrendered by their owners. They used an assessment system that declared dogs that didn't pass as unadoptable. If a dog turned in by its owner failed the assessment and their owners didn't want the dog back, the dog was killed. When Samantha's owners left her at the Humane Society, she was too terrified in her kennel for the Humane Society staff to even consider assessing her. When asked, her owners did not want her back. Fortunately, a volunteer from the county shelter also worked at the Humane Society and recognized that Samantha's only failing was that she was scared. Before either staff noticed, she and I were able to trade Samantha for a county shelter dog that would pass the Humane Society's assessment. I had a foster ready to take Samantha home before she ever saw the inside of the county shelter. The next day, the foster showed up at the shelter with Samantha, explaining she ran around the house all night, terrifying their senior dog. Fortunately, I had another foster. The next day, the foster showed up at the shelter with Samantha, explaining she kept jumping their 6-foot fence. With no third foster lined up, Samantha went home with me. Samantha remained wary of strangers until she became Tigger's vet appointment companion. Watching Tigger happily climb into one stranger's lap after another, Samantha slowly stopped hiding under the chairs in the waiting room. Then she met Tigger's physical therapists and their liver freeze-dried treats. With one positive experience after another at Tigger's appointments, Samantha started to realize there was no need to be afraid of people. 7 years from when she was turned into the Humane Society, she has blossomed into a confident and smiling Samantha who is happy to make new friends. When 11-month-old mystery dog mix Chica was turned into the county shelter by her owners, she was absolutely terrified. Her owners walked her back and put her in a kennel. As they walked away, she was cowering in the back of the kennel whining. When a volunteer opened the kennel, she growled. Another volunteer thought that because she growled, she was probably aggressive and might bite someone. To prove his theory, he got the plastic hand on a stick used to move a dog's food bowl around to test for resource guarding. He then stuck the hand on a stick through the kennel door and poked and prodded Chica until she bit the hand. He scurried off to tell the kennel person about the vicious dog. Staff got a catch pole and used it to move her back to quarantine. She had been at the shelter for less than an hour. When I arrived at the shelter, the volunteer proudly told me about what happened. I went back to quarantine, opened her kennel, and she growled at me while trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible, a challenge for a 95-pound dog. It was obvious she was terrified, not aggressive. I put a slip leash around her neck and walked her out into the shelter. She would growl and back away from anyone who approached her, but could be easily distracted by treats. A few times a day, I would take her out of quarantine and walk her around. It was clear that she was becoming overwhelmed with fear and was starting to shut down. After her 3-day owner turn-in hold was up, staff decided she was too fearful to adopt, so they had to kill her. I countered that I had interacted with her multiple times a day with no problem and would be happy to foster her. After much consideration, the shelter staff said they would do the newly implemented SAFER assessment on her to see what would happen. Needless to say, there was no way she was going to do anything but continue to be terrified during the assessment that I could not take part in. Fortunately, we volunteers were the ones who had pushed the shelter to assess dogs using SAFER. I had been selected to go to the SAFER training with the staff. I reviewed all the SAFER training material again, and there it was. The SAFER training we went to was for dogs 12 months and older. Dogs under 12 months were still considered puppies, which was a completely different assessment that the staff had not been trained to do. I quickly relayed this crucial bit of information to the staff. I also explained that the only solution that made any sense was for me to foster her until she was old enough for the assessment. They concurred. I called my boyfriend, he drove to the shelter, I handed him her leash. She walked out with him to the car, jumped in the car, and off they went. Once we got her home, it took at least a week before she would come in the house on her own. We would bring her in with a leash, but she would very quickly make it back out the dog door. At some point, we got her up on the couch, and the next 8 years looked a little something like this. 3 weeks ago, Chica's nose started to run. We took her to the vet. They did a biopsy. It was 2 weeks before they could get definite results, but it was cancer in the cartilage of her nose. Despite the fact she had not eaten for 5 days and was wheezing, we had still been holding out hope it was something treatable. There was no treatment. Now there is no Chica.